Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a fashion and portrait photographer based in Berlin, and this class is going to be about how I edit my photographs from start to finish using a combination of Lightroom and Photoshop. Over the years, I've developed a system for editing photographs, and I've developed my style and skills, and I'm going to be sharing that with you today. In this class, you'll need to have access to Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop, and you can get a free trial of this on their website. This class is for pretty much everyone who wants to get into photography. You don't have to have a lot of experience. It might help if you're a little bit familiar with Photoshop and Lightroom, but I will be showing step by step how I do everything. So if you are starting from absolutely nothing, then that's completely fine too. And if you have a little bit more experience, then you'll probably be able to follow along a bit quicker. But even if you're a bit more experienced, I am hoping that I'll be able to show some tips and tricks that you might never have heard of before, so definitely do keep watching. Feel free to check out my Instagram, shop by Claire P, or my portfolio, clairepeterson.com. There you'll be able to see my style and how I edit photos. And if that looks like something you want to learn, then definitely do watch these classes. And now, if you're ready, let's jump into the first lesson. Most of these classes are going to be step by step walking you through how to do the edits with screen recordings on Lightroom and Photoshop. However, before we do that, I did just want to make a quick note and say that before you edit your photo, you do want to have a little think about what is the concept or what is the overall mood or vibe that you want the photograph to have in the end. So this will help you not just make completely random edits in Photoshop and Lightroom. You'll have a little bit of an idea of where you want the photo to look in the end. And of course, that doesn't mean that you can't experiment in the editing stage, but it does just give you a little bit of direction when you're editing. So in some cases, it's really obvious what feeling your photograph should evoke. For instance, maybe you did a Halloween photo shoot, so you want the final image to be dark and moody and a little bit scary. But a lot of the times it's not so obvious. So in those cases, you should ask, what do you want the audience to feel when they look at this photo? Say someone picks up a magazine, they open it up, and your image is the first thing they see. What feeling should you be evoking with this image? So once you've thought of a feeling or a range of feelings that you want to evoke, then you're going to be much more focused when editing, and you're going to know what different tips and tricks that you should be applying. And it also means that you are less likely to over-edit the photo. For instance, this is the photo I'm editing in this class, and this is the final result. So as you can see, I wanted to have a bit of a vintage vibe, so it has kind of muted colors and a little bit of grain. But my personal photography style is usually quite bright and warm, so that's why it's also not too dark and gloomy. And so, of course, your own personal editing style is going to feed into the final result, even if you are trying to evoke a feeling with the photograph. So with that in mind, let's get into the first lesson, and we're going to start by working in Lightroom. Okay, so let's begin editing. So I always start with Lightroom edits. These are where I do my basic edits, and then later on I'm going to open up Photoshop and do some more in-depth color grading. But for now, let's start with Lightroom. So I'm going to start from the very beginning, which is of course importing a photo to edit. This is the Lightroom interface. So you go up to the top here and you go File, Import Photos and Videos, and this is going to open up your Finder, where you can go in and choose the photos that you would like to edit. So here I have 2 photos that I'm going to edit, and you can select which ones you want, and then of course you go to import. So that's how you bring photos into Lightroom to begin editing them. And you can see along the left here that there are all these other photos that I've edited in the past. But we're going to go to develop now to start editing. So I like to clear away the excess things by clicking the little triangle on the side to hide these, so I can see the image as big as my screen is. And now let's get into the editing. So I start with my edits doing like lens correction and all those kind of basic edits. You can see on the right hand side here, this is where you can start editing things. And so I go down first to lens correction, and I tick enable profile corrections because I shot with a 35mm lens and there's quite a lot of distortion in this lens. So if you shot in RAW, which I would recommend that you always shoot in RAW, you can click this little button here and it should automatically know the lens profile and then apply the lens correction for you. So that's what I'm doing here. So it's taken away some of the distortion of the image. And I also click the remove chromatic aberration. That's not really too much of an issue in this photo. It's where there's like high contrast areas where the focus isn't quite right and you get colors where they shouldn't be. But I see no harm in ticking it, so I usually just tick it anyway. So it will fix the issue if the issue's there, or if not, it won't make a difference to the photo. So those are the two things I do in the lens correction area. So enable profile corrections, so make sure that it's the make and model of your lens, and remove chromatic aberration, which deals with color fringing that might be in the image. So next what I'll do is go down to transform, and here you can do some manual corrections to the plane that you have shot on. So I would sometimes tweak vertical and the horizontal slightly. Of course, it's important not to go overboard with this. You are tweaking someone's face here, so you don't want to push this to an extreme. But it's also very useful if you're shooting buildings, architecture, then of course the lines are really important. And so that's where this comes in really useful. But it can also help in portraits like this one. And you can tick the constrain crop to make sure that you don't get any of the white border around and make sure you're only getting the actual image in the crop. And so you see here that there's this switch button to the left of the title of the area you're in, and you can click that to show what changes you've made in that section. And then of course another basic edit is the crop. So I don't need to do too much here, but what I have done is made sure that my eyes are falling on the line of the top third. Basically I'm just following the rules of thirds here, and I'm going to make that crop. So that's another basic edit, of course, that you should do when you're editing. Make sure the crop is how you like it. And then finally, with basic edits, I would go to sharpening. So I always sharpen to the eyes. Click the square and then click to the part of the image that you want to sharpen to get this detailed focus. Because of course with sharpening you need to be quite zoomed in. So you can look at that box there now with my eye. That's where you look when you're sharpening to make sure that you get the right amount of sharpening, and you can also of course zoom in. I usually crank the sharpening up quite a bit, but I also do it later on in Photoshop, and sometimes I add a little bit of luminance. It just takes the edge away, but don't go overboard with that because it could just make it look out of focus. And then the final part of this is where I go down to the effects. You can add some vignetting if you'd like. I don't usually go for it, and definitely try not to go overboard with vignetting. And the same with grain, don't go overboard, but I do add some grain to some photos, and in this photo I'm kind of going for quite a slight vintage feel, so I'm adding a little bit of grain here. And those are the basic edits. You can see it's starting to make a difference, but there is a lot more to do. These were the basic edits, and next we're going to go into Lightroom color grading. Okay, so we've done some basic edits in Lightroom. So now it's time to get into the color grading in Lightroom. And I always do some basic color grading in Lightroom first, and then later on when I'm in Photoshop I'll do some more advanced color grading. But for now let's start doing some basics. So of course we'll start off with the white balance. So this depends on the kind of look you're going for. I'm pretty happy with the white balance here, but I am going to knock up the tint slightly, so just to make it slightly more pinker. And remember, all these tweaks that we're making, it depends on the vibe of the photo that you want. So if you want something really dark and gloomy, then maybe you'll darken the shadows. Or if you want something a bit more light, then you'll maybe brighten the shadows and brighten the highlights even. So it really depends on the look you're going to go for. I am lowering the highlights here a little bit and upping the shadows a little bit because I do want a fairly bright photo. And I'm also going to bring down the blacks, which is what I do to add a little bit of contrast and just add a little bit of depth into the photo. And I'm also clicking the backslash key to toggle the effects on and off so I can see what edits that I've done, so I can see the effect that my edits have been making on the photo. So I would usually not add vibrance or saturation here because I actually would add that a little bit later on, which I'll show you. So for now I'm going to go into tone curve. I'm going to add a slight S curve. So this will add a very little bit of contrast. If you want a more contrasty image, then you might add a bigger tone curve here, but I'm just going to add a very slight one because I don't want it to be too contrasty. So you can see the change that's made there. You can also slightly bring up this point at the bottom here, and it's just going to lighten your blacks a little bit, which actually will give it a vintagey kind of effect. So that's another thing you can do. But anyway, it's all about tweaking and seeing what works. So after you've done the tone curve, it's time to come down to the color section. And here is where I might add some saturation to some parts. And you can see it's broken down by reds, oranges, yellows, greens, aqua, blue, and magenta and purple. You can tweak the parts of the photo that are these colors, basically. This can depend on your own personal style. I quite like to make my oranges a little bit more red and sometimes bring up the luminance of the oranges. It really depends on the vibe that you're going for this photo and also your own personal style for editing. And sometimes it's good to push things to the extreme to see how it looks and then drag it back, because of course you don't want to do some really saturated thing or desaturated thing. But it's interesting to bring it to the extreme and get an idea of what that looks like and then drag it back to more grounded levels. And like everything else, it's all about tweaking, making little tweaks, seeing what works, what doesn't work. And of course, toggling on and off to see the changes that I've made here. And sometimes you'll be surprised. So a lot of the time with greens, you think parts of the image are green, but actually they're coming up as yellow and the system sees them as yellow. That's why some of these sliders aren't actually doing anything to the image. So now we'll go on to split toning. So again, I like to push it way too far to see what color I'm working with and then drag it back. Here, I'm playing around with a few different colors, like there's a greeny color here, and you can see that I'm working with the highlights here. And then this is bringing a color into the shadows. So when you first start using these kind of tools, it can be so easy to do it too much. And I know from my own experience, when I was first starting out with photography, my images were very over-edited. But that all comes with practice. It's just, again, tweaking it and always remembering the vibe that you're going to go for, what story you're trying to tell. Finally, we'll come to calibration. So again, try not to go overboard, but you should definitely play around with this. You have the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. So before you were sliding the red, orange, yellow, all that, and it was only editing the pixels that the system saw in that color. But for this one, it will edit any pixels that have any slight bit of the color. So for instance, in the red primary, if a pixel has a little bit of red, then it will make a change to that pixel. But all you need to really know is this is where you can again tweak the colors and do some color grading, and it's all about experimenting. As I keep saying, literally just go ahead, make some changes, push it really far, and then drag it back. Make sure to not go too overboard. If you're not sure, you can ask someone what they think. And if they can tell something's super edited, then it might not be the best editing. You might need to drag it back a little bit. So this is all the edits I've done. I'm just going to go up now to the color section and just do a few more edits. But yeah, I might take out a bit of saturation here or add a bit of saturation here in one of these channels. So the great thing about adding saturation in the color sliders is that you're just adding a little bit of saturation to the certain parts of the images that you want to pop. Whereas before, if you were doing the saturation slider at the top, then you're increasing the saturation for the whole image, and that's when you can get some like really Andy Warhol kind of vibed photos. They're often too edited. So those are my color grading edits in Lightroom. A little bit later on, we're going to go and do some color grading edits in Photoshop. But for now, let's move on to the next section. And in the next section, we're simply going to export this so that we can start getting editing in Photoshop. So, you've made all the edits you want to make in Lightroom. So now you might want to copy these edits and paste them onto another image from the same shoot. So you simply go Command C or Control C on Windows. You can then select all the edits that you want to copy over, and you probably want to untick crop and spot removal, and some other ones maybe untick local adjustments so that you're not copying and pasting things that shouldn't be copied and pasted. You can go ahead, go to the other image and then go Command P or Control P. Simple as that, you've pasted on these edits to a new photo. You can also make a preset so that another time you might want to do a similar edit, you will be able to use this preset on another image and then you can simply tweak it as you like. Again, same as copy and paste one, you might want to untick or tick a box. Maybe you want to take away sharpening, maybe you want to do that for each individual image, whatever. Just make sure all the boxes that you want are ticked and the ones you don't want are unticked. And there you go. Now it's in our user presets. So you can click this next time you're editing an image and it will automatically put in the edits that you've done. The great thing is that then you can go and tweak these edits. So even if you're doing a completely new image and it's a different vibe, but you know that you are quite happy with the edit you've done before, you can paste this edit and then go ahead and change the other parts of the edit that you don't like for this new image. And now let's export so we can start working on this in Photoshop. So go to File, Export. Choose where you want to export your photo to, of course. I usually put it in another subfolder called Lightroom Edits. That's just how I organize it. And then in File Settings, I would usually export as a JPEG. Image sizing, I would not resize to fit usually because I want to export them as big as possible. So the resolution is 300. And then this is important, great time saver. Down in post-processing, you can choose Photoshop from the drop-down menu. So that's going to automatically open up Photoshop for you with this image. So then you can dive into the edits that you want to make in Photoshop. So that's how you export into Photoshop. So let's now look at making edits in Photoshop. Now let's look into how we edit in Photoshop. I do like to make some edits to the skin. So this is retouching. I don't go overboard, but I do like to make some slight edits to slightly improve what we're working with. The first thing I do is I brighten the under eyes. To do this, you can duplicate the layer. You can do this by right-clicking and then going down to duplicate layer. What you want to do is press J. That will bring you to the tool you need, but you might actually need to go over here and hold down to get to the exact tool we need here. So hold down and bring it to the patch tool. That's what we're going to be working with. Then you simply take part of the under eye and the part that you want to brighten, and then you click that part and then slide it, and this is where you're going to be brightening the under eye. Now right now it looks quite extreme, but we're going to be tweaking that. It's going to brighten this part of the eye, so slide it to a part of the skin where it's brighter and you're happy with this. It's obviously much too extreme right now. In the blending mode section, take it to lighten, and once you've done that, you can go to the opacity slider and bring the opacity down, because we're not going for perfect here. It's got to look natural and you want it to be natural. So take down the slider slightly and see what looks natural and looks good. So I'm pretty happy with that. To see the before and after on a Mac, you go Alt and then you click the eye and it will hide every other layer apart from the layer that you clicked. So next, make a new layer, because now we're going to take away some of these blemishes. Now, this is all relative. Sometimes I won't edit my spots at all. I'm trying to do it less and less because I do think it's important to show what people really look like, and that includes blemishes. But I'm going to show you now how to take out spots because, you know, I guess a spot isn't a permanent part of someone's. I don't think it's unethical to retouch the skin in this way. Right now we're working in a new layer, which is really important because if you make any mistakes, you can simply delete the layer. You're not making permanent changes to the original image. These are just layers on top of the image. Let's get editing these blemishes. So hold down where we had the patch tool and go into the healing brush tool. Anywhere where you see a blemish, you first click Alt, source the part of the skin which you think looks good, and that's the part of the skin that you want to replicate, and then click over the spot, and you can start editing out the blemishes on the face. So this works pretty well as a beginning, but you can also then go to the clone tool by clicking S. This will bring you to the clone tool, but you might also have to go over to the tool section and make sure that you're on the clone stamp. So you use the clone stamp to take out any of the tricky areas. For instance, even though I use the healing brush tool, it's not quite taken away the redness of this spot. So I'm going to use the clone stamp. So the clone stamp is painting over this part of the image with another part of the image. And again, you use it by clicking Alt, sourcing the part of image that you want to paint, and then brushing over it with your mouse by clicking. So I like to try to do ethical editing. I'm not doing these huge edits. I'm not changing the structure of the face. I'm not airbrushing or using frequency separation. Not to say that you can never use that. It depends on your own style and it depends on who your client is. But definitely for social media posts, for instance, and when you're editing, I think like bloggers or portraits, I really think it's better to do the retouching, but not to go overboard, not to airbrush people's faces, not to change people's too much, definitely not to make people look unrecognizable or to change the structure of their face. So that's why I do these small edits. I'm editing out spots, I'm brightening the under eyes, but I'm not completely changing someone. So I'm going to fast forward through this because you have an idea now of how to do it, and it does take a little bit of time. And I'm also going to show you how you would remove something out of the background. This is a very small example. There's not too much in the background of this image, but you can see here there's some sort of black spot on this wooden beam. And this would be a simple case of using the clone stamp tool and painting over it so that it's basically becomes invisible, and now that distracting part of the image is gone. This is a very, very simple example, but you can do it with more complicated things. It'll just take a longer time to get it right. And then you can see the before and after. I've taken out some spots, I've brightened the eyes, and it's looking nice. Now I want to even out the tones of the face. So what I'm going to do is use the eyedropper tool to select a part of the face where I know it's the right kind of color, it's the right skin tone for this person. And then I'm going to go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color, click OK. So now you want to click here on the layer mask and you go Command I or Control I to invert it. So now it's invisible at the moment. But what you want to do is choose a white brush, and now you're going to paint back on the visibility. By using this white brush but working on the layer mask, you're bringing back the edit you've made. So here you can see I'm bringing it back. Now this looks ridiculous at the moment, but that's because you're going to see what I'm doing now in a minute. I'm painting it back on. Now I realize that it's an opacity 50% and actually I want it to be 100%, so I'm just going to change that, and I'm going to put the blending mode to color, which is the blending mode I'm going to use, but again this is still too extreme, but for now I have it at 100% so I can see where I'm painting. So yeah, you want to paint the full face or whatever skin is visible in your image. This is to even the skin tone so that you don't have parts of the image that are a different color because of the lighting or whatever. So now you've done this, it's too extreme at the moment, so you're going to go to opacity and you're going to bring down the opacity. So I'm bringing it to about 40% maybe. It's kind of hard to see in this screen recording, and even in real life it's not too much of a difference, but it is making a little bit of a difference, and it's evening out the skin tone. And you can also click into the layer mask and then see what spots you've missed. Sometimes it's easier to do this. So you do that by pressing Alt and then clicking into the layer mask. And with this, you definitely don't want to get the whites of the eyes. The whites of the eyes should remain white. And then around the lips, you also want to be sure that you're not colouring in the lips. So to do that, you can put your brush on black and then paint around the areas that you don't want it to be. So you can do that around the eyes, you can do that around the mouth, anywhere else where you think you might have accidentally painted it. Make sure to go over with black to erase it, basically. So there you have it. There's some basic edits in Photoshop, and next we're going to go into color grading.